Today I want to talk about understanding science. It's the first lesson in a small series that we do at the very beginning of the school year to help us to understand some of the things that we're going to be covering so that we can be successful. The term "what is science" is kind of important. It's a generic question, and I hope you know the answer to that at the end of this lesson, especially since that would be one of our vocabulary words. But science is the knowledge gained by observing the natural world. What I want you to see is the picture that I'm expanding out. If you take a look, you're going to see this scientist. Looks very confusing, not sure what he's doing. However, when I did some research, I found out that this is a geologist in Argentina by the name of Ricardo Alonso. And he's measuring footprints left by a dinosaur millions of years ago. Now, as you know, taking measurements is just one way that scientists collect data to answer questions and test hypotheses. So today what I want you to do is I want you to use your science journal, and I want you to write down a few questions that I have for you. And try to answer them so that you can bring them into class and we can talk about them. The first one I want you to write down is, where do scientists perform scientific investigations? Where do scientists perform scientific investigations? If you need to, remember you can pause and write the information down and then restart where you need to throughout this lesson. Okay? Next one. The next one I want you to write down would be, what is a scientific investigation? What is a scientific investigation? Remember, writing these down and writing down what you think the answers will give us a good start for discussion in the classroom. Okay? The next one I want you to write down would be, how do scientists come up with scientific investigations? How do scientists come up with scientific investigations? When you're working on these questions, you really need to be thinking about one major factor, which is the big idea that we're supposed to be gearing towards, and that is, what processes do scientists use when they perform scientific investigations? These three questions will help us to maybe come up with some information about that question, especially what processes scientists use when performing scientific investigations. Okay, going back to using the photo from originally what we had up here of the scientist measuring the footprints of dinosaurs, I want you to write down 3 more questions that I have, using this photo to kind of guide yourself to answer these questions. And the first one, I'm going to pull the photo in a little smaller since you've seen it. The first question I want you to write down would be, what is a hypothesis? What is a hypothesis? I know we've talked about this in the past, but it always helps to reestablish where we've gone and maybe bring on some new ideas. So write down what a hypothesis is. The second question I want you to write down would be, what other ways do scientists test hypotheses? The gentleman in the picture is obviously not just measuring to be measuring. He has something in mind, probably a hypothesis, and maybe measuring is part of that, part of how he's going to create an experiment. So what other ways do scientists test hypotheses? The third question I want you to write down is, what processes do scientists use when they perform scientific investigation? Now, we've used some terms like scientific investigation a couple of different times in this recording. We've also used hypothesis a couple of different times. The idea would be for you to understand what those terms mean. So when we move on after this, you'll understand exactly the direction we need to take. In your science journal, I would like for you to write essential questions, and this is the information that we want you to write down. You're going to do this with each lesson. So each lesson is going to have essential questions that you're going to need to be aware of, the key concepts. We've talked about key concepts for a long time. One of them for this lesson specifically is, what is scientific inquiry? Okay, remember that the three dots are the questions that you need to write in your science journal. Okay, what is scientific inquiry? These are things that we will answer later on, so you can leave them blank, but leave a space so we can write information down. The second question is, how do scientific laws and scientific theories differ? We're going to talk about that in the information that's going to be presented in this lesson. And the third question, right here, what is the difference between a fact and an opinion? So all three of those questions need to be written under essential questions in your science journal under Understanding Science, which is lesson 1. We'll talk about how to take notes or take some notes from these in class before you have to view this lesson. So as a reminder, you are writing these under essential questions. The other things that we need to pay specific attention to, believe it or not, is your vocabulary words. And they are very important, as you know. You're going to write your vocabulary words, and there's quite a few of them in this lesson just because of the nature of the lesson itself. You're going to write these down in your science journal, and as you go through the reading, which will accompany this lesson, you are to write your definitions for each one of these. Okay? So you'll write down the vocabulary term, and when you come across it, you're going to write the definition for these. So science is one, observation, inference, hypothesis, prediction, technology, scientific theory, scientific law, and critical thinking. And this is all information that will be in the reading that accompanies this, as I said. Okay, so right now I want you to imagine you're on a hike in the mountains. You see something strange. You pick it up. It looks like a shell. You're curious. How could a shell be up in the mountains? Well, congratulations. You just completed the first step of being a scientist. How did you do it? Are you concerned? Are you curious? You observed the world around you. Then you ask a question about your observation, and that's part of what science is all about. Okay, so with this first little story, we brought up our very first vocabulary word. What I want you to do is, in your science journal, you're going to be writing the definition of science. Okay? Science is the investigation and exploration of natural events and of the new information that results from these investigations. Remember again, I'm going to reiterate this a couple of different times. You may stop the video, write the information down in your science journal so that you keep caught up throughout this video, and then start to play it again where you left off. Science is kind of important, and that right there is your first definition, so please be writing that one down. Okay, so remember with our story about the hike in the mountains, we made an observation. We found something that we were curious about, and we made the observation. And then we ask a couple of questions. You know, one of them might be, how did that shell get on the mountain? You knew it wasn't supposed to be there. That might be one of the questions. So in this investigation, we started with a question. The world around us, as you know, is full of amazing things that can lead you to ask questions such as this one. Starting with a question is only just one of many ways to start your investigation or to come up with a plan of action. Remember that people use science in everyday life and careers. As for this example of the fireman, and I will move all this information up so you can see the fireman. Okay? The firemen wear clothing that has been developed and tested to withstand extreme temperatures and not catch fire. Okay? Parents use science when they set up an aquarium for you guys as a pet, and your fish. Athletes use science when they use high-performance gear or wear high-performance clothing. Without thinking about it, you use science or the result of science in almost everything you do. Your clothing, food, hair products, electronic devices, athletic equipment, and almost everything else you use are the results of science. Okay, moving right along. There are many different parts of the natural world, many things to study. Because there's so much to study, scientists often focus their work on just one branch of science or one topic within that branch of science. There are 3 branches of science. There are earth scientists, there are life scientists, and there are physical scientists. Those are the 3 main branches of science, but everything is broken down into smaller parts to each one of those branches. The picture that I want to show you, this one right here, is an earth science picture. And the scientist is actually doing some work or investigation with lava. One of the questions I might ask you about this specific picture is, what kind of questions might the earth scientist shown in that picture ask about the material being studied? It's a good question. I'm quite sure none of us has ever investigated volcanic lava. But one of the questions that might come out of this is, what materials are found in the lava? What materials make up that lava? Another one might actually be, what is the temperature range of molten lava? How do they determine at what point does rock become molten? Another question that might be asked is, what gases are associated with the lava flow? All of these questions can come from just one picture, one thing that you're seeing. Remember that earth science is the study of earth, including rocks, soils, oceans, the atmosphere, surface features of earth. Earth scientists collect lava. This one specifically collected lava samples. Earth scientists might ask other questions such as, how do different shorelines react to tsunamis? Or things like, why do planets orbit the sun? Or another one might be, what is the rate of climate change, which has come up lately and seems to be a hot topic. So those are some questions that earth scientists might ask in their own field, which is a smaller area of earth science, like studying the planets or studying specifics like the climate or shorelines. They're all broken down into smaller parts. The next picture I want you to see would be this one, with 2 scientists doing some work in reference to a polar bear. Now, when you take a look at the picture, you do question as to what they are doing. Well, life science involves the study of living things, or biology. These biologists, which is the picture you're seeing, are attaching a radio collar to a polar bear and marking it. The mark on the bear's back can be seen from the air, and biologists can tell which bears are being tracked. Biologists also ask questions such as, why do some trees lose their leaves in winter? Or one may be as to, how do birds know which direction they're going. Another one might be, how do mammals control their body temperature? One question I might ask you about the picture would be, why would life scientists want to put radio collars on polar bears? That's a pretty good question, and I think some of you could probably have some good answers with this, which we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about the study of life science. Okay, the next picture I want to show you will be this one right here. And if you take a look, it's someone that studies physical science. The study of matter and energy is physical science. It includes both physics and chemistry. This research chemist is preparing samples of possibly new medicines. Okay. Physicists and chemists ask other questions such as, what chemical reactions must take place to launch a spaceship into space? They also might ask a question that is kind of important. Is it possible to travel faster than the speed of light? One other question is, what makes up matter? And that's a very good question too. So these are all things that a physical scientist might ask about. The specific picture that I showed you here, why would a research chemist be considered a physical scientist? Why would a research chemist, which is what you're seeing, be considered a physical scientist? Okay, so all of those questions are ones we would ask in those specific fields. Each field has different questions to ask, just like we ask about the shell on the mountain. Okay, now we want to talk about scientific inquiry. When scientists conduct scientific investigations, they use scientific inquiry. Now, scientific inquiry is a process that uses a set of skills to answer questions or to test ideas about the natural world. There are many kinds of scientific investigations, and there are many ways to conduct them. They're not all the same. Some use some processes, some use others. It kind of depends on the process that they want to go through, the scientist wants to go through. The series of steps used in each investigation often varies. Okay, so in a few minutes I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you a flow chart of how we would go through a scientific investigation. But first I want you to start off by doing what we would normally do. And that is, to begin the inquiry, we would make an observation of the natural world and ask a question. Okay, so as you know, observation, right here, is one of our vocabulary words. I really need you right now to pause this, write the vocab word as well as the definition in your science journal. We're going to have 4 specifically on this part of the lesson, and each one of them are very, very important to the process because each one of these vocabulary words are part of steps in scientific inquiry. So observation is the act of using one or more of your senses to gather information and taking note of what occurs or what happens. Suppose, and that's what we're thinking about now, and this comes back to what's going to happen here in the flowchart, and that is, we're going to suppose you observe that the banks of a river have eroded more this year than in previous years, and you want to know why. So your question is, why is the bank eroding faster this year than it has in previous years? You also note that there was an increase in rainfall this year. After these observations, you make an inference based on these observations. Okay, so the next one would be inference. Please write that definition, please. An inference is a logical explanation of an observation that is drawn from prior knowledge or experience. Things you've known about, things you've done in the past, that's prior knowledge. In this case, you may infer that the increase in rainfall caused the increase in erosion. you decide to investigate further. You develop a hypothesis and a method to test it. So then we move on to hypothesis, which is also a vocabulary word. Okay? Write the vocab word and the definition. A hypothesis is a possible explanation for an observation that can be tested by scientific investigation. Okay? A hypothesis states an observation and provides an explanation. For example, following the same procedures we've been doing, you might make the following hypothesis. More of the riverbank eroded this year because the amount, the speed, and the force of the river water is increasing. That could be your hypothesis. Okay? When a scientist states a hypothesis, they often use it to make predictions to help test their hypothesis. So the next vocab word we have is prediction. Okay? A prediction is a statement of what will happen next in a sequence of events. So basically what we're trying to figure out is what's going to happen next. We already know what's already happened, and that is that the riverbank is eroding. But we want to know what's going to happen next. So a prediction can help us do that. Scientists make predictions based on what information they think they will find when testing their hypothesis. For example, predictions for the hypothesis that we've talked about might be if rainfall increases, then the amount, the speed, and the force of river water will increase. If the amount, the speed, and the force of the river water increases, then there will be more erosion. Okay, so let's go to one of our pictures here, and that way I can kind of walk you through some of this information that we've just covered. And that one or two pieces is observation and question, which is what we start with. We start with observation and question in this inquiry. Okay? Some of the things that we touch on is state a problem. Okay? State the problem. Another one would be gather information, and another one would be to infer. So those three things are all part of observe and question. From the question, we use that information and we hypothesize and we make a prediction. In this case, we talked about the erosion, and so our hypothesis would be erosion occurs more quickly along banks during heavy rainfall because the speed and force of the water increases. That could be our hypothesis at this point. The next step we go through would be to test that hypothesis. We test the hypothesis using models. We design experiments. We gather and evaluate evidence or research. And we collect the data and record the observations. When you test a hypothesis, you often test whether your predictions are true. If a prediction is confirmed, then it supports your hypothesis. If your prediction is not confirmed, you might need to modify your hypothesis and retest it. There are several ways to test a hypothesis when performing a scientific investigation. These would be the ones such as design an experiment, make a model, gather evidence, and the like to those. One way to test your hypothesis might be to make a model of the riverbank in which you change the speed and the amount of water and record results and observations. This is just one of several ways that you could perform or test your hypothesis. The next step in this process after testing your hypothesis would be to analyze your results. Analyze your results, which means coming up with graph information or classifying information or making calculations or other processes. You can use various methods. Often it's hard to see trends or relationships in data while collecting it. So while you're collecting the information, you really can't see that there might be a connection between some of the data information and what you're looking at. Your data should be sorted, graphed, or classified in some way, and after analyzing the data, additional inferences can be made at that point. As you look at our chart, the next piece of information after doing this would be to draw conclusions. You want to infer or you want to summarize to come up with a conclusion. Once you find the relationship among data and make several inferences, you can draw those conclusions. A conclusion is a summary of the information gathered from testing a hypothesis. Scientists study the available information and draw conclusions based on what they see or what they have. Once you have your conclusion, you've made your inferences, and you summarize the information, you want to determine whether your hypothesis is supported or whether it's not supported. Deciding whether it's supported and not supported is going to help you determine the next step in the scientific inquiry process. If it is supported, then we're going to come right back over. We're going to come right back over, and we are going to repeat several times our process of testing the hypothesis, meaning repeating our investigation or our experiment several times to confirm the information and the data that we have collected. If, though, our hypothesis is not supported, which means the information that we've come up with doesn't support or doesn't show that we were correct with our information or our answer for our hypothesis, you want to come back over here and you want to modify or revise your hypothesis, write it down again, make some more predictions from the information that you have, and start the process over again with testing. You have to remember that scientific inquiry is not completed once one scientific investigation is done. If predictions are correct and the hypothesis supported, scientists will retest the prediction several times to make sure the conclusions are the same. If the hypothesis is not supported, any new information gained can be used to revise the hypothesis. Hypothesis can be revised and tested many, many times. Once you're supported and once you've gone through your testing of your hypothesis many times and you know that it is correct, then you're going to want to share that information with other scientists. Scientists might share their information in ways such as talking or communicating or sharing their lab notes or even publishing the information in science journals. They communicate results of the investigation to inform other scientists about their research and the conclusions of their research. Scientists might apply each other's calculations or conclusions to their own work to support their hypothesis, or they may actually try to help support the hypothesis that the present scientist had come up with. Please remember that the results and conclusions from an investigation can lead to many outcomes, such as the answers to questions, more information on a specific topic, or even to support a hypothesis. Other outcomes are technology, or new materials come from our investigations, as well as possible explanations to other things. Okay, so at this point, I want to share one last vocabulary word with you for your journal, and that would be technology. Let me make it a little larger here so you can see it. Technology is the practical use of scientific knowledge, especially for industrial or commercial use. Please write that in your science journal, and that way we can take care of all the information and you'll have definitions for each and every one of our vocab words. Okay, so since we've talked, I want to pose some questions to you that you're also going to write in your science journal, and I want you to answer them from the information that we've talked about. The first one, and I'll move these down a little here so we can pull up the other information that we're looking at presently. One question I want you to answer is, what do you do when you observe something? Write that in your science journal and go ahead and answer that one to the best of your knowledge using the information that we've talked about so far. Remember, you can pause this, write the question and your answer, and then start it up again. Okay? The next one I want you to answer is one that I told you would be on this, and that is, what is scientific inquiry? That's a very good question, and we've covered that just now using some of this information. What is scientific inquiry? Please write the question down as well as your answer to this. Okay, and the last one I want you to write down. How are observations, hypothesis, and predictions related? How do each one of those relate? Observations, hypothesis, and prediction. Again, write the question down and answer it to the best of the information that you've come up with so far from this lesson, and we will cover the information in class further. Okay, so now we're going to talk about scientific theory. Often, the word theory is used in casual conversation to mean an untested idea or an opinion. However, scientists use theory differently. That's where we're coming in right now, and you realize that we actually have another vocab word. Scientific theory is one of our vocab words, so please write the word as well as its definition. And the definition is, a scientific theory is an explanation of observations or events that is based on knowledge gained from many observations and investigations. Scientists regularly question scientific theories and test them for validity, or whether or not they're correct. A scientific theory generally is accepted as true until it is disproved, or until they find out it isn't right by investigations. An example of a scientific theory is the theory of plate tectonics. We talk about plate tectonics, or the movement of the crustal plates, all the time. This is a theory. This is not a law. The theory of plate tectonics explains how Earth's crust moves and why earthquakes and volcanoes occur. Next, we want to talk about scientific law. A scientific law is different from social law, which is an agreement among people concerning a behavior. A scientific law, which is the next information I want you to write down in your journal, is the definition. A scientific law is a rule that describes a pattern in nature. Okay, describing a pattern in nature. Unlike a scientific theory that explains why an event occurs, a scientific law only states that an event will occur under certain circumstances. As an example, Newton's law of gravitational force implies that if you drop an object, it will fall towards Earth. Newton's law does not explain why the object moves towards Earth when it's dropped, only that it will. You have to remember that scientific information constantly changes as new information is discovered, or as previous hypotheses are retested. New information can lead to changes in scientific theories. When new facts are revealed, a current scientific theory might be revised to include the new facts, or it might be disproved and rejected altogether. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask some questions that you're going to be writing down in your scientific journal again. So let me minimize some of this and get the questions up. And the first one is, what is scientific law? Make sure you're writing it down, and then at this point I want you to use the information you've just incurred to answer the question, what is scientific law? The next one, how is a scientific theory different from an everyday theory? That's our next question I want you to write down in your science journal. Recall some of the information that we just talked about theories, and explain why A scientific theory is different from an everyday theory. The next one, if you notice, you'll see the big key with the check mark, and that's one of our key concept questions. One of the key pieces of information we need to learn. How do scientific laws and theories differ? How do they differ? We just covered some of this, so please refer back, but make sure you're writing this information down in your science journal and answering the questions. The last one that I want you to take a look at is the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. This law has been verified by many investigations. Why is this a law and not a theory? Basically what they've done is they've given you an example of a law. This first part is the law. The question they're asking you is, why is this law and not a theory? So basically what it's coming down to is it wants you to think through the information and give me another reason as to why theory isn't law. Okay, our last topic that we're going to talk about is evaluating scientific evidence. The evidence that we find, how are we going to evaluate it? Did you ever read an advertisement such as the one below that make extraordinary claims? That's this one here that I'm pulling up the information for. It says, learn algebra while you sleep. Kind of gaze through that information. If you've seen an advertisement similar to this, you probably practiced critical thinking. Okay? Critical thinking, and I'm going to close this down slightly. I'll come back to that in a second. Critical thinking is one of our last vocab words. What I need you to do is write the vocab word down, as well as its definition in your science journal, knowing that critical thinking is comparing what you already know with the information that you are given in order to decide whether you agree with it. Okay? To determine whether information is true and scientific or pseudoscience, which is false science, you should be skeptical and identify facts and opinions. This helps you to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of information and make informed decisions. Critical thinking is important in all decision making, from everyday decisions to community, national, and international decisions. So going back to the article, if you take a look and you've read the article, Mathorific new algebra pillow is scientifically proven to transfer math skills from the pillow to your brain while you sleep. This revolutionary scientific design improved the algebra test scores of laboratory mice by 150%. So it goes on to explain, for only $19.95, those boring hours spent studying are a thing of the past. So act fast. If you order today, you can get the algebra pillow and the equally amazing geometry pillow for only $29.95. That is a $10 savings. So if you take this to heart and you use critical thinking, you can realize from the knowledge that you already have that this article is bogus, or it's not something that you would believe in, not something to be fact. So to start to wrap up the information that we've talked about in this lesson, please remember that science cannot answer all questions. Scientists recognize that some questions cannot be studied using scientific inquiry. Questions that deal with opinions, beliefs, values, and feelings cannot be answered through scientific investigation. For example, questions that cannot be answered through scientific investigation might include, are comedies the best kind of movies? Or is it even okay to lie? Or things such as, which food tastes best? The answers to all these questions are based on opinions, not facts. Okay, so to wrap up all the information, I want you to make sure that you go back through and have written down all the questions that have been asked, as well as the one that I've asked you to answer. You also need to make sure that you've written down all of your vocab words, as well as their definitions, and be prepared to discuss this information in class when called upon. If you don't understand information that's on this video, you may ask me. My classroom door is open always to my students. And if parents are concerned about something their child doesn't understand, they may contact me via email or via phone. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this lesson, and I look forward to going on to our next lesson.